Hi guys, Mr. Anderson here for Science Lab 7, and today we're going to be talking about matter. But not just matter, but matter that changes. Because sometimes matter changes, and sometimes those changes are physical changes, sometimes those changes are chemical changes. All right? If they're physical changes, it doesn't really change the molecules. It doesn't change the composition of the matter, right? It's still the same molecules. But when it's a chemical change, that's what we're going to talk about today. When it's a chemical change, the chemicals change, right? A chemical change is a change in which the composition of a substance changes. All right, it causes a new substance to form. It's like when two things mix together, two different kinds of matter mix together, and something changes. Their chemicals change, new molecules form, a new substance forms. That's a chemical change. All right, so today we're going to be looking at chemical changes, and we're going to look at 6 different ways, or 6 different signs, 6 different things you can look at to try to figure out if it's a chemical change or not. All right? If these things happen, it's a good chance, it's a good sign, it's a good possibility that it's a chemical change happening. All right? So let's look at these. Change number 1. Change number 1 is if there's a color change. That's a good chance that it's a chemical change. All right? So it could be like when the leaves are changing outside in the fall here in Illinois. You know, that's a good sign. There's chemical changes happening in those leaves. New substances are forming, right? Or if you, like when you cut an apple and it starts to turn brown, that's because there's chemical changes happening, right? Or if you whenever something burns, right? Whether you're talking about toast or paper or wood or whatever, if something burns, it changes color, and that's a good sign that there's a chemical change. All right. Sign number 2 that there's a chemical change is when there's a change in energy. If energy is released or energy is gained. Think about when things burn. Like if there's a fire, you can feel the heat. You can see the light, that heat energy, that light energy that's given off. That's a sign, right, that there's a chemical change happening. But sometimes the reverse happens, right? Like if you have one of those chemical cold packs and you squeeze it and you break the seal and the two chemicals mix and more energy is absorbed than is given off and it gets cold. Right? Those cold packs, energy is absorbed. That's a sign that there's a chemical change happening. Okay? Sign number 3 that there's a chemical change is when there's a change in smell, right? It smells different than it used to. Think of like when food rots. Ew, like when food rots. Ew, it's rotting and it smells gross, right? That's because there's chemical changes happening there. All right? So that's a good sign, good indicator that there's chemical changes happening. Sign number 4 is if bubbles form, right? Think about when you mix vinegar and baking soda, right? And bubbles form, right? That's a good indicator, a good sign that there's a chemical change. All right? Sign number 5 is if a solid forms. Now, this doesn't happen a whole lot. You don't see this happen a whole lot in nature, but sometimes when two liquids mix and a solid forms because of that, that's a new substance, right? That's a chemical change. All right, and then finally, number 6, if it's not easily reversed, if you can't put it back the way it was, then that's a good sign that there's a chemical change. Think of like something that might be easily reversed would be ice, right? If you have an ice cube and it melts and it becomes water, liquid water, right? You can put it back, right? You can take that liquid water, you can freeze it again and make it ice again. You can easily put that back. That's a physical change. Right? The molecules stay the same. It's a physical change. But in a chemical change, think of like if you had a piece of paper and you burnt it. All right? You can't put it back and make it paper again. You have the ashes there. You can't put them back and make them paper again. Right? That's a chemical change. It's not easily reversed. But what's amazing is that whether we're talking about a physical change or we're talking about a chemical change, one thing that holds true is something called the law of conservation of mass. Right? The law of conservation of mass says that mass is neither created or destroyed. It was developed by a French scientist called Antoine Lavoisier, and he came up with this idea that says, hey, mass isn't created, mass isn't destroyed, it might change form, right? There might be a chemical change, those molecules or those atoms might get rearranged and form new substances, but the mass doesn't change. All the mass you have before a change is still there after the change. Think of like if you take an apple and you cut it up and it's in pieces, right? All that mass, all that stuff is still there. That's a physical change. But it's even true with chemical changes, right? Like if I had a candle and I light a candle and that candle burns all the way down, all the mass that made up the candle, all the molecules that made up the candle, they're still there. They're not in the candle anymore. They're up in the air, right? it changes form. It's a chemical change. But if we could like collect all the gases that come off of that candle and find their mass, and we find the mass of the candle before it was lit, those masses would be the same, right? Mass is not created or destroyed. Okay, TED Talks has an awesome video about this. I'll link to it down in the description. I'd encourage you to check that out. Okay, mass is not created or destroyed. Law of conservation of mass holds true. All right, so hey, I hope these different signs, different things help you to figure out if something is a chemical change or not, right? Is there a color change? Is there a change in energy? Is there a change in odor? Or do bubbles form? Or does a solid form? Or is it not easily reversed? All these things can help you determine if it's a chemical change or not. All right? Well, I hope this helped you learn a little bit more about chemical changes. This is Mr. Anderson signing off for Science Lab 7, saying, hey, stay curious.